welcome to Greenlit, the Buffalo 8 podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Halderman, and each week we're going to dive into a different piece of content, film and television, and we're going to talk with some of the biggest names in front of and behind the camera as we dive deep into how they were financed, produced, developed, marketed, and the crazy stories behind how many of them got made. Welcome back to Greenlit. On today's episode, we're chatting with cinematographer Robert Yeoman. His path is so unbelievably fun, especially for people that like Wes Anderson, Roman Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola, Paul Feig, Judd Apatow. The list goes on and on. His career has now risen to shoot a number of studio movies, most notably Bridesmaids and Ghostbusters. But hearing the stories about how he and Wes worked together for 25 years as of the recording of this podcast in 2020, dating back to their first film, Bottle Rocket, in 1995, is just an amazing story of friendship and partnership in a crazy industry that has changed so many times over since they started working together. I'm really proud to be able to call him a friend, and without further ado, enjoy this conversation with Bob Yeoman. Welcome back to Greenlit. Today I'm talking to Robert Yeoman. So first off, Bob, thank you for carving out the time and chatting today.
Great. So glad to be on it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, I met Bob a number of years ago, and I want to come back to that story. But I actually want to start with Bob having worked on every live-action Wes Anderson movie, and also with directors like Noah Baumbach, Paul Feig, and Roman Coppola. And so there's so many projects to choose from. But I want to chat and at least start the conversation off with Rushmore and how Rushmore was greenlit, and or Bob, how it came together and how it was made from the time you coming on board. And obviously it's such a pivotal movie for so many people involved with that project.
Well, I had originally met Wes before Bottle Rocket, which was his first film. And Wes and Owen Wilson and Luke Wilson had done a little short of their film Bottle Rocket, which they showed at Sundance, and it got to Polly Platt, who was a producer for Jim Brooks at Jim Brooks's company, and Jim Brooks met Wes and Owen and was like them and gave them the money to make Bottle Rocket. And so I still have the little letter that Wes sent me, handwritten in his own distinct handwriting. You know, dear Mr. Yeoman, I wrote this script called Bottle Rocket. I'd love it if you read it. And I immediately fell in love with the film and so the script anyway. And I met Wes, and at that time, I had done a series of very low budget indie type movies. I had yet to do a big studio movie, which none of these movies were. And a lot of these movies, quite honestly, were going nowhere. And I was, hoping to move up the ladder, so to speak. And but I met Wes, and he was a 25-year-old kid and never directed. And, it had all the earmarks for, we didn't know what was going to happen with it, but we hit it off right away. And I just liked him, and I liked his ideas, and he seemed very bright. And I remember our first meeting, we kind of talked about movies that we liked and actually movies that we didn't like. And we kind of agreed on just about everything. And so we really hit it off. So he offered me the movie, and we did Bottle Rocket. And at first it wasn't particularly successful, but then it caught on. Martin Scorsese kind of talked about it and said, what a up and coming talent Wes was. So, of course, when he sent me the script for Rushmore, I was on board. We had such a great time together on Bottle Rocket. And we got involved very early in the casting. And not to say too much, but I know there was one young actor, who was going to play the lead. And we were all kind of sold on this one young kid. And then Jason Schwartzman showed up for an interview and a screen test, and that's when things changed. And Jason had never been in a movie before, but Wes immediately said, "This is my guy," and even though Jason really didn't look like what Wes had described, originally Wes was hoping for a, quote, young version of Mick Jagger. And Jason was not that. But there was an energy about Jason and a sweetness about him that Wes immediately saw. And so we cast Jason, and then Bill Murray, and the rest is history. How that all the casting came along. So at that time, Bill Murray, I won't say his career was struggling. Obviously, Bill Murray's career never struggles, but it was a move in a different direction for Bill, and it kind of gave him a breath of fresh air, I think. And so, and he and Wesley, they obviously hit it off really well, and the rest is kind of history. He's been in every movie since, I think. So,
Great.
Yeah.
And Bob, so now you guys you cast Schwartzman. And I believe that film shot down at the boarding school or the prep school that Wes had gone to, St. John's Prep in Texas.
Yes.
Is that all correct?
Yeah, it's all in Houston, Texas. Yeah.
So full on location shoot, or was there any studio, anything built on a stage for that movie?
You know what? Everything was locations, and we shot at St. John's, and Wes had quite a relationship there. So all the extras were St. John's students. There's the Serpico play with the kids put on. It was kind of based on Serpico, and those were all St. John's drama students. And we used the classrooms that Wes had been in, and some of the teachers were in it as well. And so we made it very much mostly there at St. John's, but then there was the public school, which was down the street. When Jason gets kicked out of, Max gets kicked out of Rushmore, it was all pretty much locations. I can't remember any studios, and it was kind of back then. Wes was very much into doing everything in camera. Now we've gone a whole different direction with, as when we're shooting movies, there's a lot of post-production that's involved in combining elements and things that we didn't do back then. So it was all shot on pretty much practically all in camera, and we had wanted to do anamorphic on Bottle Rocket, and we shot a test. The studio said, well, or James Brooks's company, Gracie Films, they were like, okay, let's see a test. So Wes and I shot this test, and we purposely made the anamorphic shots very kind of artsy, and then we had to shoot the same scene in the spherical, and we kind of made them a little bit more awkward, and I, fudged the lighting a little bit so it didn't look quite so good. And we sent it off, and they said, oh, we can't tell the difference. You guys shoot 185. So, we'd always planned on shooting anamorphic for that film. So because of the success of Bottle Rocket, Wes was able to get anamorphic. And so that was our first venture into shooting the widescreen.
That's great. And so the reason I ask about how much was shot on location versus things that may have been shot on sets or on stages, that movie, the Rushmore, definitely felt like you and Wes were really clicking in terms of building that really definitive or go-to style that I think all of us think about when we think about a Wes Anderson movie. Curious on the prep process, how different it was prepping for Rushmore versus prepping for Bottle Rocket. And then I want to take that as well, Bob, into Royal Tenenbaums, which became so hyper stylized across the board.
Well, Wes has a very long prep period for me and the production designer and the assistant director, more so than most movies, because everything is very well planned out. And I think he learned from Bottle Rocket, which was his first film, the value of this long prep. And so we go to every location with the production designer and the AD, and we talk it out, in detail. And even as time goes on, we even would take film cameras with us, and because we shoot film, we've shot film on all our film, and we would actually shoot the location in many cases in available light, just with the AD and the production designer and the location guy, whoever else have to be there. They stand in for the actors. We move them around the space, and we play around with it a little bit, and then we look at it later and just kind of evaluate it, and Wes will make changes. He also started to do much more elaborate storyboards. So after we've seen a location and kind of talked about things, he does his own little sketches, which are very, distinct. And if you want, I can send you a few copies of those that you could show people. I mean,
please, Bob, that'd be awesome. I bet people would love to see it, I'm sure.
Yeah, and they're very, they're kind of crude, but they're very charming in their own way, and they certainly kind of tell the story of what we want to do. And then starting around Moonrise Kingdom, we started doing animatics, which are little cartoons that are kind of hand drawn, and Wes will take the storyboards and he gives them to this guy who turns them into these animatics, and Wes reads the dialogue and does all the characters, which is kind of interesting. In fact, I haven't seen it, but I think on the new the new Grand Budapest Hotel Criterion version, they do have his animatic on there, which is it's worth seeing. It's because we all knew it very well, but we always. I think it also came from his work doing animated films, and he was used to working that way in animation, and so he's applied that to actual live action shooting now as well. And so we frequently, when we get on the set and things aren't quite working, he has the animatic on his iPad, and we just kind of look at it again and try to. And I would say now, most of the movies are shot pretty closely to what the animatic is. Occasionally you have to make adjustments. Many times, because each shot kind of fits a particular piece of dialogue, and many times the real life actor cannot move down the hallway quite as fast as a guy can do it in the animatic. Right. So you realize, oh, gee, there's no way physically we can do this. So little adjustments have to be made along the way, but we kind of stick to it pretty closely.
Yeah, I actually had a question in sort of just my outline here, which was how much spontaneity takes place with the Wes movies, if any at all. And it sounds like it's not so much spontaneity, it's more just adjusting on the day, where you have to adjust when you have to sort of deviate a bit from the animatic. But overall, there's not a ton of, and I know Noah Bombach, who you also have worked with, is very similar in the sense that people are sticking to what has been written. People are sticking to what has really been built with the production designer and the director of photography. Is there any, or are there any stories of deviating and improvising or spontaneity in the Wes Anderson films that you've made?
Well, it's a lot of it has to do with more what the actors are doing, I think, because when he gets the cast there, obviously when you have the level of cast that he has, they kind of work things out with Wes. But visually, we stick pretty much to the plan because he likes to work quickly. We often generally prelay the track beforehand. We've worked it out beforehand. So when the actors arrive, basically everything's kind of taken care of, because that way Wes can spend all of his time with the actors, and right. He doesn't have to worry about what we're doing behind the scenes, and so we pretty much stick to the plan. Also, it's not unusual, like if someone was filming our interaction here, it would be very much what we have here. I would be in a whole different location than you, and we're here talking to each other. Right. And like on Moonrise Kingdom, the house, the big red house, he loved looking towards the house there, but the opposite direction he didn't like so much at all. So we would shoot all the reverses at a whole different location, and So that is something that is not unusual in a Wes movie, and it also allows us to be, uh, 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 you know, a lot of directors will come to a location and they're not quite sure what they want to do, and so they, you basically have to be ready for anything, and that means not only me as a cinematographer, but the art department has to dress the entire place. Whereas with Wes, it is so specific that he says, "I'm only going to see this side of the room." And they don't have to look at the other side of the room, and they don't have to dress it, and we don't have to light the other side of the room.
Right.
So it makes it way more efficient and quite, and I think that's one of the many reasons that his movies, cost, way less than they probably should, because, you're saving money in those ways,
Right.
that you're so specific in what we know we're going to see. And, I try to talk to him as best I can, and he accommodates me as best I can. Can we look this direction in the morning and this direction in the afternoon? And, particularly on day exteriors, because Wes doesn't really like to do lighting outside. It allows you to just, shoot without using lights. And that means we go faster, and also, it'll look, from my point of view, it looks better. So,
Right. It's great. Going back, Bob, for a second to Rushmore. So Rushmore, you guys, now that the film gets released, commercially and critically, how is that film accepted, and how is that film, how is it receptive? How is it received from an audience perspective, but also how does it change things? Because I feel like Tenenbaums is a big movie, and I know Tenenbaums is next. And I'm just curious, when you sort of think of it chronologically from Bottle Rocket to Rushmore, what happened in between that period, between now Rushmore and Tenenbaums, that may have been different than Bottle Rocket and Rushmore?
Well, Rushmore was critically well received, commercially not as well received. And I remember when it came out, in many ways, for me, selfishly, if a movie I work on is well received in the film community, that's almost better than if it's poorly received in the film community and makes a lot of money. But people love the movie. I got a lot of response from people. I know one person said, "Oh, I watched that movie. I loved it so much. I just sat in the theater and watched it again. I didn't leave." And, it really struck a chord with a lot of people. I think at the time it was very fresh and different, not only in the tone and the writing, but in the way it looked. And I think Wes made a giant leap, in terms of his filmmaking skills, between Bottle Rocket and Rushmore. And it was a much more polished film. And I think you really felt, I mean, not that you didn't on Bottle Rocket, you certainly did, but you really felt there was a vision of a particular filmmaker there.
Right.
And I think that attracted a lot of people in the film industry, which allowed him to get the cast that we got on Royal Tenenbaums. Certainly Gene Hackman, Gwyneth Paltrow, a lot of these actors probably wouldn't have signed on, but everyone in the film industry loved Rushmore, so they were more eager to work with him. He was kind of the new up and coming hot director, I think. So I think in casting it helped a lot, and it also got him Scott Rudin, who is we all know is a very heavyweight producer.
Yep.
And having a heavy hitter like Scott Rudin on your team doesn't really affect me personally, but for a filmmaker like Wes, it certainly opens a lot of doors and gets him into places that maybe he wouldn't have been able to open otherwise. So, that was a big addition to the team, I think. And, if he needed something done with the studios, he could call Scott, and Scott could help him take care of it, and
Right.
he gave him some muscle that I don't think he had before.
Yep.
So I think it was the casting mainly that and the addition of a little bit of muscle on the upper side that kind of was a big difference for us.
It's great. Was Scott has Scott been involved in every Wes picture since Rushmore?
I believe so.
Yeah.
We don't. I personally don't really interact with him at all, and he's rarely on the set. He came to the set maybe once on Royal Tenenbaum, and yeah, because we were shooting in New York. But I haven't seen him on the set ever since then. But I know Wes has phone calls with him, and he's more dealing with studio politics and
Right.
That kind of stuff that doesn't really affect me at all.
Right. I want to shift gears just for a second. I want to come back to Wes and sort of what I would sort of call the next chapter of the films that you've made with Wes over the years. But I want to touch on working with directors like Noah Baumbach and Roman Coppola, and how much of that, Bob, you feel like spun out of, like you said, the film business and just the general audience really loving those first two movies in particular, but then Tenenbaums was such a life of its own as well. Transitioning then to working with someone like Roman or someone like Noah Baumbach, what that was like, how those films were different, what was similar in the approach, because they're obviously all of sort of this school of, we had read a quote about you in preparation for this interview about how if you read a piece of material and don't like the script, you'll pass on the movie, which is obviously a great credo to live by in this business. That sort of collective of directors, pretty intellectual, pretty studied sort of students of history and students of art and of film history. Again, Roman, Noah, and Wes. What was that like? The transition to working with those guys in between making Wes Anderson movies and in between sort of defining this style.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with Noah. The only reason I was asked to do Squid and the Whale is because Wes was was one of the producers on the film, and he contacted me and said, "Hey, this buddy of mine, Noah Baumbach, once is making this movie, and we would like you to shoot it." So I read the script and loved it, and I guess I hope I'm not betraying anybody, but the movie was made for $1.5 million, and we shot it in New York City. And of course, it was shot a while ago, so that 1.5 is probably worth $2 million now. But I don't know. But
still crazy. That's still crazy.
Days. It is, and we shot in 24 days. And I met Noah and liked him, and I just loved the script, and we shot 16 millimeter, partially for savings, and also because Noah was a big fan of the French New Wave, and he liked the idea of a very loose camera style and allowing the actors to kind of move around, and it was less structured visually than a Wes movie is, and a lot of it was handheld, that I was hand holding the camera. And if the actors moved one way, I'd move over there with them, and so it was a much looser style of shooting. And, it was a period movie. And I just remember the one day Wes showed up on the set, we were shooting a shot, and Wes looked at it and he said, "Well, there's a lot of non-period cars over there," and by that point, Noah and I had totally, we realized that there's no way you're shooting in Brooklyn, and we can't control the traffic in Brooklyn. So we were like, yeah, we know it. Thank you, and then he just left us alone after that. But it was. I'm sure Wes and Noah, because they're kind of writing partners. They spent a lot of time in post together, and the movie is one of those movies I've worked on that turned out even better than I thought it would, and is very it's a classic, and I love it. And so it's a very different working relationship. And Noah, because we had such a quick schedule, I think it was 24 days. We don't have a lot of time, and he likes to spend time with his actors. So I tried to light the film as generally as I could, so that when the actors showed up, we weren't, limited. Oh, we can't look there because the lighting is, and so it was a different style for me and whereas Wes is so precise about everything, and he wants everything to look just right. I think Noah, not that he doesn't care, he does care, but he had to get his movie made, and he had to do it within a certain amount of time, and I remember the AD David Wexler and I were scheduling it, and I went to Noah and said, "Hey, listen, is it okay if we shoot this scene in the morning outside the house because the street looks so much better in the morning, and then we move inside later?" And I remember him telling me, "Listen, I just have to shoot my scenes and get this done. Yes, if that's going to make it easier, yeah, I can accommodate that," which was very nice of him. And I think there was only one scene of everything he wrote that we didn't get. We got everything. So I think he was pretty happy with that. Roman Coppola, I knew for a while. He was a big fan of Drugstore Cowboy, and I had shot some commercials with him. And when he got the money to do CQ, he asked me if I'd do it, and I was thrilled. I love Roman. I mean, Roman is like one of the sweetest, nicest guys I've ever known, and he's also kind of a jack of all trades because he's been in the business his whole life. He can shoot, he can edit, he can do just about anything, and so he was very aware of camera, obviously, and we had several different styles for that CQ. We shot mainly on 35 millimeter, but then there was the 16 millimeter black and white of Jeremy Davies documentary, and so Roman does extensive research, and the French New Wave again, the Italian cinema, boy, I'm trying to think of the documentary that we kind of based our thing on. I'll think about it and I'll send it to you.
Yeah,
but
please.
It's shoot, darn, I can't remember. But anyway, so we have a lot of visual references that we go through quite extensively, and so by the time we start shooting, we have pretty much down. Like, he encouraged me for the dragonfly sequences to shoot it more 70s style, harder light, and light it more in the direction of how it would have been done on the day. So I was challenged to do that, and the black and white documentary to shoot more in a documentary style. And if anything, if I were to do the movie again, I might even take it more in the direction that he was challenging me to take it. I feel like occasionally I'd pull it back and maybe put a little diffusion in front of a light, or things like that just clean it up a little bit just for my own aesthetic. And maybe for the movie, I would have been better off just letting it go more in the style of the 70s, but
it's awesome though. And so was that, you mentioned you had known Roman for many years. Had you worked on anything with him, or had you just connected over the years and just known and run in different circles that overlapped?
We did commercials, and this was during the time after I'd met Wes. We did second unit on Roman does second unit for his dad back then, and The Rainmaker was a film that his dad was shooting in Memphis, so Roman asked if I would do second unit on The Rainmaker, which John Toll was the cinematographer, and it was a big, huge movie, and I idolized his dad. His dad was one of my heroes, and so of course I said yes, and it was a great opportunity for me because it was the first time, because I came up through low budget indie type movies. I'd never worked on a union movie before, and in fact, this movie got me into the union. And I remember Roman telling me that he said, "Oh, he's telling me that he was telling his dad that well, Bob has to join the union in order to be doing this. And his dad's comment was, another one bites the dust. So, because his dad, he thinks big, but he liked the idea of a small unit. And so we were constantly going off to shoot things, Roman and I, and we had just a few people. And his dad loved coming in and seeing what we were doing because his dad had fantasized about working this way, versus having a huge Hollywood production with hundreds of people standing around. And, he fantasized, that's making films, going back and shooting with, 8 people or whatever we had, so we would frequently, like when we ended up going to stages in Oakland at the very end to shoot on stage. And so John Toll would be on one stage and Roman and I would be on the other stage. And then Francis would be in the Silverfish and he could kind of see who was ready. And then if Roman and I were ready, he'd come over and shoot a shot there, or he'd go with John Toll on the other stage. And, I learned so much from watching John Toll. As I said, I never worked with another experienced DP, so I'd never seen anything as big as this. So I learned so much about lighting and things with John, and he was very generous, giving me a lot of advice about things, and it was an incredible experience for me. So that's how I got started with Roman. In the meantime, since then, Roman does all the second unit for Wes, and Wes, early on, we never had a second unit, but it started on Life Aquatic, and Roman comes over, and because he and Wes have such a close relationship, he goes out and shoots second unit shots for us all the time now, and has in the last few films.
It's a good segue, Bob, into Life Aquatic. Life Aquatic is so stylized, and I feel like a good starting point for the way the Wes Anderson films evolved. I remember the first time you and I met years ago when you were making Moonrise Kingdom, and I was fresh out of college, and you were really kind enough to carve out time and walk me through the process of how you guys were making that movie in Rhode Island. And I was truly like a month out of school, or maybe not even, now that I think of it, because it was that summer of 2011. And when I think about, going back to my question, the segue into Life Aquatic, were you starting then to use animatics? Were you starting then together, you and Wes, to prepare shot by shot, sequence by sequence?
Not really the animatics at that point. It was more, very intricate storyboards, and I'll send you some of those so you have them.
Cool.
And again, it was a very long prep period, and it was particularly, that movie was in some ways the most difficult we did, because first of all, you're on boats.
Yep.
Which are totally uncontrolled at sea, really. And we had so many different locations in and around Italy. It was all shot in Italy. We had the giant stages at Cinecittà. We had, we went to Naples. We went to the Amalfi Coast. So it was a lot of driving up and down the coast of Italy looking for locations and figuring things out. It was very complicated. And, we also couldn't control the weather, obviously. And when we started shooting, it was late summer and it was bright and sunny. And then by the time we finished, it was winter and it was gray and cold all the time. And so there was a lot of issues around that. And, kind of a funny story, the cutout of the boat where Bill Murray says, "Look, you probably know the shot." And so somebody did a mathematical rendering of how the boat should get into this space on the stage at Cinecittà. And so Mark Freeberg, who's a very close friend of mine, was a production designer and a great production designer. They built the boat, And so I came over with our widest anamorphic lens, which was, I think, a 32. And Mark and I stood with our backs against the wall, and we couldn't get the boat into the shot. This is before we were going to shoot, several days. And we both looked at each other like, oh, fuck. What are we going to do? Wes will kill us if we can't get the boat in the shot. And so I immediately got on the phone to Panavision, and I said, do you have anything wider than this lens? And they said, we have a 28, somewhere. I said, send it to me immediately. In the meantime, and I had asked Mark to keep the boat off the back of the wall so I could light the sight behind the wall. And I said, just drag it to the wall, So they physically had to drag this boat was huge, the cutout. And they dragged it on the stage back to the wall. And like a couple days later, the lens arrived, and I called Mark from the set. I said, Mark, I got the lens. Let's go check it out. So literally, we're standing in the doorway with the door open, and we're as far back as we possibly can, and we just got the boat in the shot. And we're like, oh, both of us were just like, oh my God, thank you, and because we didn't want to have to tell Wes, oh, by the way, we can't get the boat in the shot. Or the other idea was to knock holes in the walls of the stage. And this was a famous stage at Cinecittà that Fellini had shot on. And we were very reluctant to destroy their walls.
Right.
But, that was, again, it was kind of a tricky shot. You were on a techno crane where we're, and it has to move from place to place to place. And, with certain pieces of dialogue. So, in a storyboard or an animatic, the camera can move very quickly, around, around. But in real life, it doesn't move quite that quickly. So that was a particularly difficult shot for us to pull off.
It's such an iconic shot.
Yeah, I get asked about it a lot, but I can remember my heart was just beating like this, trying to pull that one off, and, so anyway, that was.
I love it. Take me now to Grand Budapest, which is just a visual masterpiece and a feast for the audience. That had, I know you mentioned that post-production became a bigger part of the process with the West movies. Things being just in camera became less so the focus, but still the camera work in that film is just absolutely spectacular. That film, curious on just the backstories, Bob, and any anecdotes on making it and the process having evolved so differently than back in the earliest days, 25 years prior of making Bottle Rocket.
Yeah. Well, it's Wes found this beautiful little town, Greenlit, Germany, which is on the eastern border, right across the river from Poland, and basically he had scouted Eastern Europe pretty extensively looking for hotels. And, the thing that he realized was no hotel is going to let us come in and paint the walls and control it, blah, blah, blah. And so he was looking for another space, and someone said, oh, there's this town of Görlitz. And he said, okay, I'll go check it out. And he found it, and there was an old department store that's 5 floors, and it was just sitting empty. And he said, okay, this is, they said you can lease it for a year and do whatever you want. So we knew we could control it. We could build what we wanted. We could paint the walls, and it had a beautiful skylight up top that kind of lit the whole place. And so Wes decided, okay, this is perfect. I'm going to make the top floor all the production offices, the wardrobe room. The top 2 floors were camera room, production, art department. Everybody was in the one place.
Yeah.
And then the bottom floors were our set. And the first floor was, of course, where we had the lobby and, all the other rooms we could make there. And it was, kind of ideal for us. I mean, I did have to argue with him a little bit because his concept had been to shoot in available light, and it was lit by the skylight. Well, the problem with that is we were in Eastern Germany in January, where it's dark and it's light about maybe, I think our exterior days were 8:30 to 2:30 or 3, but then it's dark, I mean, and when you're inside a building like that, you need to put lights up to come through to maintain that, because basically it was a little bit of a struggle for me, but he finally let me do it. And it allowed us to shoot. We could be there at noon, we could be there at midnight. It would always look the same, and so I think it was money well spent, and the effort we did to put it on, it was well spent. It's most of the movie was shot right there, and or within walking distance of our hotel, which is right near there. And we just found all the locations all around Görlitz, which was this beautiful little town, city in Germany that no one was there. It was winter. And occasionally we would have to go, like the prison was at another little town where we kind of did an overnight there for a few nights. Again, similar situation to the prison. It was a skylight that we just pounded HMIs through. And there was always a certain amount of negotiation I have to do with Wes for gear, and he's a very much less gear is better of the mind, and so we always have a little bit of a negotiation as to what I can do and what I can't do. So, but I've learned to just prep him and tell him, beforehand what's going to happen, so he doesn't show up and
Yeah.
is surprised. What do you mean there's lights coming on through here? I mean, he's not surprised. So I do a little prep, but we also shoot film, and we shoot a slow stock, which means more light, and it's not like shooting with an Alexa where you can go in oftentimes with very little lighting and do something. It's a different animal entirely. So,
And Bob, that's a perfect segue again to you. Obviously, you mentioned the Coppola film. You sort of got your union card. Had never worked on big studio projects with big infrastructures and unions involved. Now you do shoot. You shoot very big studio movies now. I'll let you sort of pick whichever studio movie you'd like to reference. It's an awesome story. Certainly, I have to imagine for you looking back at this really storied career, and now shooting these big studio pictures. And there's not that many cinematographers shooting these big studio pictures because there's just not that many of those studio pictures being made. And you're one of a handful that are consistently shooting pictures with some of the biggest directors and some of the biggest stars in the world.
Well, I guess the first one I did was Get Him to the Greek with Nick Stoller. And, I'm trying to think how that came about. I think because Nick and Rodney Rothman, who was his writing partner at the time, they were fans of my work, and they just kind of out of the blue said, "Hey, why don't we try this guy?" And I met Nick, and he's a sweetheart, wonderful guy, and I thought the script was really funny. And so that was my first venture into big studio movies, and it was Judd Apatow was the producer, and so I was part of the Judd team. And I had kind of been, I'll tell you kind of a funny story. I had kind of agreed to do another movie, but I hadn't signed a deal, but just verbally had said, yeah, but the producers were, wanting to pay me very little money, and there was a little bit of arguments going on. And so I was color timing Get Him to the Greek over at Company 3, and Judd Apatow came by, the producer, to kind of look at see what we were doing, and he said, "Hey, Bob, can I talk to you for a minute?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course, Judd." And so we went out into the hallway, and he said, "I got a movie I want you to shoot." And I said, well, I'm supposed to be doing this other thing. And he said, "Yeah, I know all about that. I know other people, blah, 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 but I want you to do this movie." And I said, "Okay, well, it's a little awkward, but what?" And he said, "It's called Bridesmaids." And he said, "I want you to meet Paul this weekend and just see if you guys hit it off." So I said, of course, Jed, and I mean, Jed's a big power player. And so I met Paul for lunch, and Paul, of course, showed up wearing his three-piece suit and looking very dapper. And, but I liked Paul. He was very funny, and I could tell very bright. And originally, Bridesmaids was a little bit different movie when I signed on to it. Kristen and Annie had written it, and Kristen Wiig, and it was a little more of a personal, smaller story. And I think when Judd got involved, he added a lot of elements to it that weren't there initially. And so little did I realize that this movie was going to be such a huge hit. And like I remember when I saw Get Him to the Greek, when I saw the screening of it, the cast and crew screening, I said, this movie's going to be a huge hit. It's funny. It's got everything, and I thought this was going to be a blockbuster. And not that it did poorly, but it didn't do as well as I think people were expecting. And then when Bridesmaids, I was like, well, we'll see what happens. And of course, it became this huge hit, and people, particularly women, really responded so positively to it. It was finally a movie about women, and they weren't just the girlfriends, And there was a certain amount of level of humor to it that was on the cruder side that you hadn't seen before. And it became kind of iconic in a way. And I remember a few years later, I was doing a commercial in Detroit, and I showed up on the set one day, and the production manager was this woman in Detroit, and she came up to me and she said, I MDB'd you yesterday. And I said, oh, really? And, I was expecting Rushmore, Little Tenenbaum. She goes, you shot Bridesmaids. And I used to joke with Paul. And I say, they're going to put that on my gravestone. He shot Bridesmaids. We used to joke about that all the time.
I love it.
Anyway, it started my relationship with Paul. I did The Heat, and I did Spy, and I did Ghostbusters with Paul, and we've had 4 movies. And I've shot commercials with him. Paul's a great guy. He couldn't be, more opposite than Wes. I mean, whereas Wes is so specific about everything, Paul prefers to, we have an idea, but we kind of bring the actors in, and it's a lot of improv. We shoot 2 cameras. We cross shoot all the time. It's so much as just kind of, spontaneous riffing, and he wants to have both sides of that, because you can't really recreate some of those moments, and so it's a totally different style. But Paul's a wonderful guy, a lot of fun, and the sets are always a lot of laughs and fun, and he's got great actors that he brings in, and it's about as opposite of shooting with Wes as you could find, really. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I know we're almost up on time here, and there's one thing in particular that I read during some research about you, which is you had said somewhere that every day that you go to set still, there's a bit of nervousness or a bit of anxiousness as you head to set. Given what you've done in your career and the iconic movies that you've shot for 25 plus years now, walk us through that nervousness of still feeling that when you're going on to a set.
Well, I get up and I get in the van, I head out in there, and it's always a little bit nerve-wracking, because you're never sure what exactly the problem is going to arise. You'll get there, and the grip will say, oh, this is wrong, or the lighting guy will say the generator broke, or there's always something that I have to deal with, or it's pouring rain outside, and they're like, okay, we still want to shoot even though it's pouring rain, and it wasn't what our plan was, and so until we get the first shot, and often with Wes, some of the shots are very difficult to achieve. They're tricky, and I operate the camera with Wes, and so there's always a certain amount of nervousness about that. To give an example, we did a shot in Grand Budapest, towards the end of the movie, there's a shootout on the top floor of the where Rafe comes out of the elevator, and basically I have to pan, basically do 360 degrees and hit certain actors at certain pieces of dialogue. So not only do I have to know the dialogue by heart and know where I have to be, but I have to anticipate a little bit and get there very quickly. And because it's so high up in the hotel, the grips had built a scaffold for me to be on, and I'm way up in the air, and I'm up there by myself. What I found was typically how I do those shots is I actually operate them with a fluid head, and I move around the scaffolding, but I couldn't do that because it was so high. The scaffolding was kind of moving when I was moving around it. So I realized I couldn't do that. Of course, now the actors are there. Wes wants to shoot, and so there's a certain amount of nerve-wracking, I'm nerve-wracked, and so I used an old trick that, many groups use, and I attached a laser pointer to the tripod head, and I put little X's on the ground, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I just could stand there and not move around and just kind of hit with the panhandle and just kind of hit those marks. And I capped the eyepiece, and that's how I did that shot, but there's a certain amount of things where, the pressure's on. And I can remember when we finally said, okay, we got it. Just the feeling of relief that I had, that I had been able to pull this thing off, kind of by the seat of my pants. And so there's frequently those types of situations that you encounter that kind of, it's like, I used to play basketball as a kid in high school. And, it's like pre-game jitters, it's very similar, and once you're there in the heat of battle, you kind of forget about everything else and you just concentrate on what you're doing. But before you get there, it's like being in a basketball game, once you're on the floor and you're playing, you don't even think about it. But, when you're sitting there on the bench waiting, it's your stomach is just going crazy. It's very similar. So,
Well, Bob, first off, I want to thank you. 10 years ago, you were incredibly gracious with your time then, and you gave a true lifelong Wes Anderson fan, and someone that really I credit your work and Wes's work as one of the main reasons I wanted to go into this business, and really a big part of the driving passion for.
I remember your film, by the way. Your film at Lake Forest College, and we came and we met down. I'm not going to say the name, but we met that little coffee house down there, and I remember it very well. But I remember you went to Lake Forest College, and I grew up near there, and my cousins were from Lake Forest, so
You've always been such an awesome, grounded guy, and your work speaks a tremendous amount for itself. And thank you for carving out the time and chatting today. And let's just keep in touch. And I don't know if you have anything to close with, but I feel like you've hit on everything, and it's been a great conversation.
Well, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me. And, when this whole virus thing blows over, maybe I can meet for a lunch or a coffee or something.
Sounds good, Bob. Thank you again, man.
All right, cool. All right. Well, have a nice afternoon, and stay safe.
You too, Bob. Talk soon, man.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all for listening to another episode of Greenlit, the Buffalo 8 podcast. For financing questions, feel free to contact us at Bondit Media Capital at info@bondit.us. For production, development, and distribution questions, feel free to contact us at Buffalo 8, info@buffalo8.com. We'd love to hear from you and hope you'll continue listening to the podcast episodes ahead.